I'll be honest, this whole mess started with a red car and a cheap kind of power. 3 mornings in a row I came downstairs, coffee not even cool yet, and found a lipstick-bright Porsche sleeping in my deeded spot, like it paid the mortgage. It wasn't a mix-up. It was permission handed down by the HOA president to her 20-something son like it was a family heirloom. That was the moment I realized quiet living wasn't on the menu. My name's Mason Cole. My wife Tara and I bought a modest condo because we wanted a simpler chapter, no drama, no noise, just a clean hallway, and a space labeled 3C41 next to the elevator where my old Ford could rest its bones. We got Miles Harbor, a waterfront complex with a board that loved rules the way some folks love baseball. And we got Lydia Beaumont President Blazer ironed to a knife's-edge smile that meant I'll see about that. Her son Derek drove the Porsche, and a smirk in equal measure. First morning I left a polite note under the wiper, "Hey deeded spot, please use guest parking." Thanks and a little smiley face because I wanted to believe we were still playing grown-ups. By Wednesday, the note was gone, the smirk was bigger, and my truck had been moved. Not nudged, moved. Someone used a key. That made my hands hum in a way I don't like. I told Tara everything at our tiny kitchen table. She slid my temper back into its holster and opened the bylaws like a surgeon opening a chest, calm, precise, practiced. "We'll do this by the book," she said, underlining sections on deeded property and unauthorized vehicles. No shouting, no slashing, no grand speeches in the garage. Paper-proof patience. So we built our little case. A window cam pointed at the ramp. A button cam over our storage cage angled at 3C41. The videos piled up like snow, Derek gliding in at 7:02. Lydia's husband Stan kneeling by my rear wheel, fishing out a valet key I'd been dumb enough to keep in a magnetic box for emergencies. Lights blinked, engine turned, my Ford rolled to guest overflow, as if it worked for them. Watching that felt like someone had opened my glove box and read my mail out loud. We sent certified letters, one to the board, one to the Beaumonts, attached copies of the deed page with my space circled twice. I ordered 2 metal tow signs from the complex's own contractor, Harbor Hook and Haul Red, on white legal text big enough to read in a blackout. I bolted one to the wall and hung the second from a chain so it hovered over the number like a warning bell. Next morning, Derek parked under both signs without even tapping the brakes. I dialed Harbor Hook and Haul and kept my voice steady. The driver who rolled in was a quiet giant with forearms like bridge cables. He checked the deed page, the signs. The letters gave a low whistle. "You did your homework, sir," then set soft straps around the Porsche's tires and started the slow ballet of winch and angle and gravity that ends with a car on a flatbed. That's when the elevator chimed, and Derek came out hot. "Hey, what the hell are you doing? That's my car," and the driver kept tightening ratchets like a metronome. I told Derek no shouting was necessary. The rules were in print, the cameras were rolling, and the green cards from the post office said he'd been warned. He didn't like that answer. He shoved me just enough to tilt my balance and flip a switch I keep buried. I grabbed his shirt, felt the fabric jump in my fist, heard my voice come out low and not entirely mine. "Do you want to try that again?" The driver slid between us like a steel door, and neighbors started appearing in the corridor, windows, faces pressed to the glass. The elevator chimed again, this time Lydia in a royal blue blazer with Stan at her shoulder. "Unstrap my son's car," she said, pointing like a judge. The driver didn't look up. "Ma'am, no. The resident has deed rights, the spot is posted, and I have a work order. You can retrieve it at our lot after fees." The flatbed rose, the Porsche tilted, and the smirk finally fell right off Derek's face. I thought that would be the end, clean line drawn, lesson learned, but Lydia didn't do endings. She scheduled an emergency HOA meeting and spent 15 minutes calling me hostile, unneighborly, unauthorized sign guy. When she slammed her little gavel and declared me out of order for trying to speak, Tara stood up with our binder tabs, highlights, still frames pulled from the footage. Point of order, she said, voice even. Article 9, Section 2 allows standard commercially produced tow signage in deeded spaces. Harbor Hook and Hall is the contracted vendor listed in the HOA handbook. The room rustled. Then the floor dropped out. This is not about a sign, Lydia snapped, cheeks going the color of her blazer. This is about what he did to my family. Stan rose slowly, eyes like old concrete. You remember Apex Steel, Mr. 10 years ago? Night shift, surprise inspection. Foreman gets fired after your report. The name hit me like a bucket of cold water. I do safety audits. I write what I see. A decade back, I wrote up a site where the scaffolding looked like a dare. The foreman fought me on harnesses and logs. The company canned him the next week. I didn't remember his face until that moment. Stan Beaumont. In Lydia's story, I hadn't saved a worker, I'd stolen a life. She turned that grudge into a crown, and the crown came with keys to my truck. We left the meeting before my temper outran my good sense. For a couple of weeks, the fight turned petty and small death by 1,000 pinpricks. An orange sticker pasted to my window labeling my pickup commercial, it isn't. A letter about a wreath on our door, tasteful, seasonal, suddenly illegal. A community rally under our window at 6:30 p.m., signs about bullying, waved by 3 people who didn't like to be told no. I learned the irrigation timer wasn't locked, and that Zone 4 covers the sidewalk. The sprinklers came on within the permitted hours, and the rally found out daffodils aren't the only things that enjoy a drink. Was it petty? Of course. Did it feel good? Absolutely. Then a cease and desist arrived from the association's lawyer listing sprinkler ambush and targeted leaf blower activity at exactly 8:01 a.m. as harassment. That's when Tara looked at me over the paper and said, "We're done with the small stuff. Bring it back to the car." The tow lot manager explained the next steps like it was the weather. After 30 days of unpaid fees, they file a mechanic's lien, then a public auction. Anyone with a cashier's check can bid. The notice went up in the legal section of a local paper nobody reads until they do. On auction day, the yard looked like a flea market for gearheads dealers with clipboards, a couple of gawkers, one auctioneer in a hat that tried too hard. The Porsche had been detailed so bright, you could see your future in it. Across the blacktop, Lydia stood with a man in a leather jacket who looked like he bid for a living. Derek had his hands stuffed in his hoodie pocket, looking 14. Stan stared at the asphalt. Bidding jumped fast, 3, 5, 15, 30, 40 dealers doing math in their heads, Lydia's proxy jabbing his number like a spear. By 60, the last dealer shrugged off, and the auctioneer sang going once. That's when I felt something colder and cleaner than anger. This wasn't about owning a shiny toy. It was about taking the teeth out of a bully that fed on other people's silence. Tara knew what I was thinking before I did. Her fingers squeezed mine. I raised my paddle for 60 and 500. The proxy looked to Lydia. She shook her head once tight. The gavel fell, and a strange hush rolled through the lot like fog. I paid. They handed me a temporary title and a key that smelled like expensive leather and cheap victory. We didn't park it in 3C41. I slid my Ford into its home and set the Porsche in a visitor spot, like a guest who'd stayed too long. The next day, I called Sal, a mechanic I trust, and a vocational school that trains auto techs. We pulled good bones, the engine, the transmission seats, electronics tagged and donated in the school's name so students could learn on something other than theories and worn-out sedans. That would have been enough for most people. I'm not sure I was most people anymore. The shell went to Hartman Scrap on a Saturday, under a sky so blue it felt staged. The crusher moved like a patient god. Metal shrieked the sound of money changing shape, and glass fell like hard rain. When the press lifted, what had been a bright, arrogant line of paint was now a cube the size of a washer edges, seamed pride gone quiet. A sedan skidded up to the fence. Lydia climbed out, hair wild, voice cracking. "What did you do?" she yelled, hands trembling toward the cube. "What did you do?" I looked at her, at the box of former speed, at the men in safety vests watching a scene they'd seen 100 ways. My voice surprised me, calm, almost gentle. "I didn't do it," I said. "Choices did." A month later, a for sale sign sprouted in front of the Beaumont unit, and then a moving truck took their furniture and their echoes. The board held a special election. A neighbor named Ruth, who'd never banged a gavel in her life, promised fewer fights and more maintenance, and somehow that sounded like salvation. The orange stickers stopped. So did the rallies. The hallways got boring in the nicest way: someone's groceries, a kid's drawing on a fridge somewhere, the daily music of a building that had decided to be a home again. People still ask me if I went too far. Some days I think yes, because there was a hard little part of me that enjoyed each step: the paperwork wins, the sprinkler slapstick, the final bid that made the yard go quiet. Other days I think no, because I've walked job sites where shortcuts kill, and I know what happens when rules become decorations. What I know for sure is that the first quiet night after it all ended, with my truck asleep in 3C41 and Tara breathing slow beside me, felt like the first time I'd sat down in weeks without bracing for the next shove. Peace, even when it's bought with scars, is still peace. If you've lived through anything like this, power dressed up as policy, small trespasses that grow teeth, tell me where you stand. Was I right to follow the rules all the way to the crusher? Or did I cross a line the moment the gavel fell at the auction? Drop your take in the comments, share your own neighbor wars or HOA battles, and tell me what justice looks like where you live, because communities don't fix themselves, people do.